Hi everybody, this is Mr. Short. Today what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to round a number to a certain number of significant figures. It's really simple. We're also going to learn how to round multiplication and division problems to the correct number of significant figures. Both of those topics mean that you have to know how to count significant figures in a number. So we're going to start out by reviewing the rules for counting significant figures in a number. Rule number 1, as you can see right up here, has to do with non-zero digits. Remember that non-zero digits are always significant. So the number 1 would have one significant figure, 2 would have one significant figure, and 11 would have two significant figures. We also have a rule about exact numbers. Exact numbers happen in counting processes. So the example that I gave in class was if you've got $25, a $20 bill and a $5 bill in your hand, because there's no uncertainty about the amount of money that you have an infinite number of significant figures associated with that $25. This also comes into play with conversion factors, like the fact that there are 12 inches in 1 foot or 60 minutes in 1 hour. Now the place where you really have to stop and think is with zeros. Remember, a zero is either at the beginning of a number, in the middle of a number, or at the end of a number. When zeros are at the beginning of a number, they are never significant. When a zero is in the middle of a number, it is always significant. And when a zero is at the end of a number, remember that's where we have to stop and take a look for the decimal point. If the number has a decimal point, like this one right here, then those ending zeros are significant because the number has a decimal. But if there's no decimal, those ending zeros are not significant. Okay, so again, if it's an ending zero, stop and look for that decimal point. Okay, you've already completed questions 1 through 4. Now what we're going to do is we're going to learn a simple strategy for rounding numbers to an indicated number of significant figures. Now in this statement right up here with information, it tells you that we're going to round these numbers to 4 significant figures. Okay, why 4? Because that's what the directions say. When you have a number like this number 42,008,000 and you want to round it to 4 significant figures, what you do is you find the first significant figure, which is the 4, and we're going to count over 4 spaces. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to draw what I call a rounding bar. That rounding bar is meant to be right there between the 8 and the 0. I know that's a little bit messy. Okay, we've got a rounding bar between the 8 and the 0 so that we only focus on the 8 and the 0. The 8 says that we're going to round that 0 up to a 1. And so we've got this number right over here, 1. And so the final number is 42,010,000. Okay, right over here, if we want to round this number to 4 significant figures, we find the 4th sig fig, which is the 6. We draw our rounding bar between the 6 and the 2. The 2 says that we're not going to round the 6 up to a 7. So the final number right here is going to be this really big number, and notice it's got 4 significant figures right up front. Okay, with this number right down here, these are beginning zeros, so these zeros are not significant. So our first sig fig is this 1 that's right here. And so we're going to put our rounding bar between the 3 and the 7. The 7 says that we are going to round this 3 up to a 4, and so this is our final answer. This number right here, it's only got 2 significant figures in the number 120. If we want 4 significant figures, we need 120.0. Remember that these 2 zeros right here would be ending zeros in a number with a decimal, so they're both significant. Okay, you guys, I want you to use the rounding bar method right here. So for example, in this first one, we would find the 3rd significant figure, which would be the 3. That rounding bar says that we're only going to focus on the 7 and the 3 right here. Okay, so use that rounding bar method for everything in question 5. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move on and we're going to talk about rounding to the correct number of significant figures in multiplication and division problems. The first thing that you need to know is there's a separate rule for rounding in multiplication and division problems than there is in addition and subtraction problems. We've got to clearly separate those 2 rules. A lot of students will mix those 2 rules together, but they're different and distinct rules. Okay, multiplication and division, rounding in multiplication and division problems is simple. So take a look. Step number 1 is you're going to count the number of significant figures in each number. you can see in this first example that we've got 3 sig figs here and we've got 2 sig figs here. I recommend writing down the 3 and the 2, like in this case right here. Step number 2 is you're going to round your answer to the least number of significant figures. So not 3, we're going to round to 2. So what I like to do is I like to cross out the bigger number just as a visual reminder that we're going to round this to 2 significant figures. Now, important step, when you type this into your calculator, I suggest that you write down the calculator answer. That's the phrase that I always use. Write down the calculator answer. Now what we're going to do is we're going to round to 2 significant figures, which takes us back to that first skill that we just practiced. Find the second significant figure. Draw your rounding bar. That shows that we're going to focus on only the 5 and the 2. The 5 says that we're going to round the 2 up to a 3. And so it makes sense that we would round the number about 325 to the number 330. This number has 2 significant figures. Here's another example. Okay, so applying the steps that are up top, steps 1 and 2. All right, the first step says we're going to count sig figs in each of the numbers that we're multiplying and dividing. The second step says that we're going to round to the fewer number of significant figures. So not 5, we are going to round to 3. I strongly suggest that you write down the calculator answer, in this case 15.77109. I want to round to 3 significant figures, so I'm going to draw the rounding bar right there. The second 7 says that we're going to round the first 7 up to an 8, so final answer is 15.8. Okay, final thing to think about. When you're doing these problems, I strongly suggest starting out by figuring out how many significant figures are in each of the number. I know that I'm going to round this question to 2, this final answer to 2 significant figures. Okay, so I strongly suggest that you do this step right here, and you're always rounding to the fewer number of significant figures in multiplication and division problems. Okay, so your job here is to complete on the previous page the rounding problems, and then on this page rounding and multiplication and division problems, question 7, and it looks like that's it. Okay? All right, thanks a lot, guys. Have a good day.